think these are going to be the last videos that I make for the urinary system anatomy. My name is Dr. Hudson, for those that don't know me, and I am just going to walk you through the descent of the urine. Remember, it's been produced up here in the kidneys, and then it is going to descend down through the ureter all the way down into the bladder, and this is fed by gravity. That's why when you stand up after laying down all night long, all of a sudden it causes a extra little rush of urine into your bladder, and that's what causes your bladder to go ruh-roh. Right? So that's that gravitational fed portion of the urine from the ureter into the bladder down below. In the bladder, we have the folds of the bladder, the ruga. These are extremely elastic and they allow for the stretch of the bladder. The next layer, so the ruga, by the way, this is the mucosal layer of your bladder, and it's transitional cells, transitional epithelial tissue, stretchable. The next layer, this big thick layer of muscle. Okay, that big thick layer of muscle is called detrusor muscle, D-E, detrusor muscle. And on the very outside now we're going to have connective tissue, typically dense irregular connective tissue that is going to be called adventitia. As the pressure inside the bladder increases, this is going to send signals up to the brain, up to the spinal cord, and it's going to create reflexive arcs, right? Pressure increases inside the bladder, so the bladder is going to start to contract. And that's going to try to send urine down through the urethra. And in the male model here, we're going to have a portion of the urethra that goes through the prostate. That's called the prostatic urethra. Then we're going to have some that passes down through the urogenital diaphragm, or through this big kind of membrane here. So that's known as the membranous urethra. You cannot see it on this model. There are other models you can see it in, or pictures, which now goes down through the spongy tissue. This is called corpus spongiosum if you ever do your repro anatomy. So they call this the spongy urethra, and that goes out of the external urethral orifice at the very tip. One last thing many of you might need to know is that there are sphincters that control our urination. There's an internal urethral sphincter, and that is found right where the bladder and the urethra join together. Internal sphincters are going to be smooth muscle, and hopefully you guys have learned at some point, smooth muscle means involuntary control. If it's involuntary, you can't consciously control this particular sphincter. So all that happens is when stretch increases inside the bladder, it's going to cause the internal urethral sphincter to relax. And that's what causes bladder to now start to go down. The good news is we have another sphincter in place that's called the external urethral sphincter, and that's found inside of this big sheet of muscle that runs along this portion of the body called the urogenital diaphragm. And that is an external sphincter, which all external sphincters are skeletal muscles, so we have conscious control over those skeletal muscles. So the good news is even when the internal urethral sphincter relaxes, that's the uh-oh, gotta go pee moment, right? But we have the external urethral sphincter that is remaining tightly shut, and we can relax it when we want to. Unless you're a baby and you don't have control of skeletal muscle yet. Therefore you just pee yourself, right? Or in geriatrics. In geriatrics, when skeletal muscles start to atrophy, then geriatrics don't have the proper control of their skeletal muscles anymore. So when the internal urethral sphincter relaxes, unfortunately they don't have as good a control over their urination. So now let's look at this with the female system. Here's the bladder right here, ruga. It's a little bit squashed. And the bladder tends to be anatomically a little bit smaller in females than males, and part of the reason is there's only so much room in the abdominal cavity. And check out this guy laying down on top of the bladder. What is this? This is the ureter. I can't believe I almost said that. This is the uterus, right? So this is the uterus right here, sitting on top of the bladder. Imagine a baby in there. Regardless, same idea now, where we're going to have this tube, right? Where the heck am I here? Yep. So this tube, it doesn't really show it very well in this model, come to think of it, but this tube right here, that's the ureter, and it's going to come down and feed the bladder. Bladder, transitional cells, ruga, same stuff that we just went through. And now what you're going to see is that there is a tube that is leaving the bladder. This is the urethra. And there is going to be the internal urethral sphincter here, and then on the outside of that, as it passes through your urogenital diaphragm, there's going to be the external urethral sphincter. And that's not really well shown on this particular model either. Of course not. Why would it be? But I just wanted to make sure that you guys had a better understanding of how females and males have slightly different urethral anatomy and slightly different bladder anatomy as well, due to the other things it's competing for inside of the abdominal cavity. Okie dokie. That's pretty much it. Urinary anatomy isn't even remotely as complicated as the digestive system anatomy, cardiovascular anatomy. So hopefully this all comes together for you guys. Please ask any questions you may have. Best of luck in your studies, and be nice to one another, as always. See you in the next video.